There really are three tiers of life that God created. And we're the one species that has the capability of relating to God himself. But we're also a species that has responsibility before God.
Welcome to My New Day. Dr. Hugh Ross is our guest today, and we are going to be tackling some amazing subjects of how science is meeting up with the Bible. And being an astronomer and having his doctorate in astrophysics, he has an incredible perspective.
He does. Just listening to him, it just motivates me to learn.
Yes.
And I think too often we've heard cliche remarks being made, you know, when it comes to Darwinism, creationism, you know, and just your own thinkings or whatever. And it's almost as though we just take a statement and say, that's what I believe.
We assume it's right, you know, without hearing the documentation.
He's authored several books, and I just want to show them to you. Hugh Ross, The Universe, Why the Universe is the Way That It Is. Simple answer, because it's the only way it'll work.
And then More Than a Theory. This is a great book.
And most recent, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job. I was just with our volunteers and people that answer the phones and your emails, and I showed them the new book, and they all went, oh. And it is. Treasures. It's one of those books.
We all are intrigued by hidden treasures.
So how the oldest book of the Bible answers today's scientific questions.
And that's where we're going today.
Okay, one other thing before we go, and that's this. There are all types of resources available, and I want you to visit our website, mynewday.org, so that you can find your link to Reasons to Believe. And that's the ministry that Hugh has headed up. There's DVDs, there's books, there's CDs, there's MP3s, there's all types of resources to help you. So Dr. Ross, welcome back to My New Day.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for your investment and just willingness to come and share so freely with us.
Sharing your brilliance with us all. But you've done so much research, so much study to get to the place where you are, and we thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
You care deeply about bringing what we talked about in previous programs, peace. But it's not just through ignoring the issues, but actually researching, studying, discovering, you know, what are the answers, you know, that we can, you know, come to an understanding with. But we feel, but we recognize that in our world today, it's almost like there's two big camps, you know, and I want to begin to explore some of the fallacies that you see in Darwinism, you know, that are there, and then, you know, how do we answer those? What do we do? You know, what's the season of time?
What are the new discoveries that you are
Well, the Bible tells us that people perish for a lack of knowledge. And, you know, as an evangelist, what I like to do is presume that it's not a rebellious spirit that's the problem. It's that they simply don't know. And if I can give them that information, then maybe the Holy Spirit can work within their lives and make them into one of God's chosen people.
Yes.
So, and I think that's particularly the case with the Darwinian paradigm. And I think the real problem there is that we have scientists today that specialize. They know one discipline or one sub-discipline, but really they're not equipped to integrate across the scientific disciplines. It'd be similar to a Christian or a theologian only be an expert in one book of the Bible. We need to integrate all the books of the Bible. And that's our passionate reasons to believe, is to help people integrate across both of God's books, the book of nature and the book of Scripture. And when it comes to Darwin, I look at his second book as being the real issue for today, Descent of Man. Everybody's familiar with Origins of Species. Excuse me. But it was in Descent of Man that Darwin said there's really no basic difference amongst all the animals here on the face of the earth. We only differ by degree and not by kind. And so he would make the point that the property of the human mind is just a natural progression from the minds of other animals. And as proof for that, he said, well, look, the difference between an ape and a fish is much bigger than the difference between an ape and a human being. It's only by degree. But there's a fallacy in that when you put that in the context of Genesis 1. because Genesis 1 says there's 3 different kinds of life that God created. Life that's purely physical, life that's physical and soulish, and that it's endowed with mind, will, and emotions, and then one species that's body, soul, and spirit, namely the human species. Now, the fish would fall into the category of purely physical life.
Or insects, probably.
Yeah, same category.
Anything that doesn't have the soul.
Right. So, of course, there's a bigger difference when it comes to the property of the mind between a fish and an ape and a human, because from a biblical perspective, the fish has no mind at all.
Right.
And whereas a human has a mind and an ape has a mind. But what I found, what really got me into writing that for this book, is researchers at UCLA and UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego, and UCLA, who began for the first time to research the properties of the human mind versus the properties of the smartest of the animals.
Mm-hmm. Who is the smartest of the animals?
Well, these would be birds and mammals. Mm-hmm. And the title of the paper that launched this whole study was titled Darwin's Mistake.
Really?
Making the point that when it comes to response to symbols, it's not just a matter of degree, it's a matter of kind. And pointing out that even the most intelligent of animals, like the higher apes and the smartest birds, mm-hmm. they can't respond to a yield sign or a stop sign. They don't know what it means, they don't know how to respond to it. And so what they were saying, there was a chasm of difference between the way human beings respond to symbols as opposed to what we see in the highest, the smartest of the animals.
Interesting.
And that even little children quickly pick up on the significance of symbols and can respond to them. But no animal, for example, can read the first page of the first Dick and Jane reader that we give to children in the first grade. Mm-hmm. No matter how much you train an ape, it's not going to be able to even get past that first page or figure out what it means. Mm-hmm. We can train them to do language, but mm-hmm. we can't train them in being able to respond to higher symbolic thought and response to that. So there's that huge difference. And then there was another paper published because Darwin was saying that our closest relative when it comes to our mental capabilities would be the chimpanzee or the higher apes. Just like we have the closest relationship with them in terms of our physical features, they said that's also true when it comes to the properties of the mind. But these 2 researchers from UC San Diego said, when we look at these animals and test them, the chimpanzee is not the smartest of the animals. Rather, that credit goes to the raven. And said this is a challenge to the Darwinian paradigm because no evolutionist would say our closest relative is a bird.
There's a lot of physical differences right there.
But see, Job puts the raven in the top 10 list.
Yes, he does.
Mm-hmm. And he's not only talking about creatures that are designed to help us launch civilization, but how they relate to us. Mm-hmm. And my own father had a pet raven when he was a young man. And he was a machinist, and so he would actually build different locks for the cage of this pet raven mm-hmm. because he noticed that the raven enjoyed picking the locks. But would wait till somebody was watching before the raven. So the raven would be in the cage, quite content. But as soon as my dad showed up, it would start picking the lock. Pick the lock, hop outside, and you kind of congratulate himself and wait for my dad to put a different lock on the cage. And he'd hop back in, and he'd pick that second lock. And the other thing my dad noticed is that he would build these 3-dimensional toys and put a little treat inside the toy and then let the raven solve the puzzle of how to
in
break
order to
apart
get into the treat.
To get to the treat. But what these researchers at UC San Diego notice is that a raven, without any human training, can take a tool to recover a different tool to recover a food treat. But none of the apes can do that. You have to train the apes to be able to do that. And it takes intense mm-hmm. training before they can do that, but the raven can do it without any training at all.
Just because of the mind within the raven.
Because they have properties of mental capability that the higher apes don't have. Mm-hmm. But going back to the way God designed these ravens, the raven really gets its pleasure in showing off how smart it is to its human owners. Really? That's how it relates to us. I mean, different animals will relate to us in different ways. I
Yes.
talk about how lions love to relate to us at an emotional level.
Yes.
The raven loves to relate to us at a mental level.
Yes.
And
And now,
so-
do ravens have emotions?
Oh, they definitely do.
Personality?
I mean, all the soulish animals, birds, mammals, and higher reptiles have that, but they have different emotions. They're not all the same. Each are designed in a different way to relate to human beings. But the way the raven loves to relate to human beings is to
They
show off how clever
smart
it
they
is.
are.
Exactly. So, but they also serve different purposes. How ravens don't seem to be afraid of us and our machines. And so today we realize that the raven is the perfect creature for cleaning up all of our roadkill. And that's kind of been the role of the raven when relating to human beings throughout the millennia, is it cleans up after us. We make a mess, the ravens come in and clean up. And so today, I mean, if you've got roadkill on the highway, the one animal that's not afraid of our cars and trucks are the ravens, and they'll come and they'll take care of the roadkill for us. So they're serving that role for us today.
Well, I know that you're basing everything that you're talking about from the book of Job. And where does it talk about the 10 highest animals or the 10 most important
End of Job
animals?
38 and all
All
of
right.
Job 39. It kind of lists each one in turn.
And something that's intrigued me that you're approaching in this book is that every one of those top 10 animals, they have brought us into a place, they have been enabling us way back to bring us into civilization. But as well, there's a redemptive purpose for them for the end of civilization as well.
Yeah, each one is designed to fulfill a different role, a very different role. And we kind of see that in our own human species too. That God has designed us so that we can function well at the beginning of civilization and at the end of civilization. For example, we didn't need the dexterity to be able to type 100 words a minute.
Right.
We didn't need that at the beginning of civilization, or the capacity to play a Liszt piano concerto. But God knew that those would be valuable characteristics towards the end of civilization, so He designed human beings that they could simultaneously fulfill those purposes. And I mention that in the book because so often medical researchers and biologists will say there can't be a God because of how bad the human body is designed. And they'll make the point like the appendix doesn't serve any purpose. It's got to be some remnant from some evolutionary process in the past. And that's because medical researchers presumed that if the appendix had function, it had to have something to do with digestion. Turns out it has nothing to do with digestion. But the appendix, we now know, fulfills a critical role in the human immune response system. So when I was a child growing up here in Canada, if you had abdominal surgery, they automatically took out the appendix because they thought it was useless. And today we don't, because we realize, hey, it doesn't have the purpose we thought, but it has a different purpose. And I can remember too being a child in the Canadian public education system where they were taking out the tonsils and adenoids.
Right, right.
And my mother, who was a nurse, said, "You're not taking them out of my son." So I managed to keep mine. But all the rest of my classmates had theirs out because the presumption was these are useless organs that are the leftovers from an evolutionary mechanism. Now we realize that they too play a response in the human immune system, and so we don't take them out anymore. And so it's through research that we're realizing what Job said all along, that when God makes a creature, He designs it perfectly for the purposes that He intended. The backbone. Remember how people used to talk about we got this tailbone?
Tail, yes.
That's because we've evolved from the
Yes,
apes. That
yes.
We have that. And we now realize that the human backbone is not perfectly designed for running, or perfectly designed for walking, or standing, or lying down, or sitting, but it is perfectly designed to do all of the above. And it's like God knew there would be a time when we'd have to sit in front of a computer screen for 8 hours a day. And so He gave us a backbone that would enable us to do that, in addition to be able to standing, walking, running, lying down. Our backbone is amazing in that it can function in so many different capacities. And it's like God knew ahead of time that we would be fulfilling very different roles at the beginning of civilization than we would at the end of civilization. And so He gave us the bodies that can do that.
These are the physical uniquenesses that we have. Mankind being created, the Bible declares, after the image and the likeness of God. Let's talk a bit about the attributes that are so uniquely different between mankind and the animals.
Well, I think the most important would be the spiritual differences.
Okay.
And I also put that in the book about how here you got these unbelieving cognitive psychologists doing research on animals and human beings and discovering what the Bible talks about, the spirit dimension of humanity and how it's unique. And so at Boston University, there was a group of researchers that explored the idea, do dogs have morality? And then what they're talking about is what's called the guilty dog syndrome.
Sorry, I'm just imagining our labradoodle when he feels bad about something. I mean, any dog, he just humbles himself to the floor and shames himself by squeezing his big 70-pound body under our bed when he's been a bad dog.
Exactly, and the dog will take on a facial expression to express what we think is repentance and remorse.
Yes.
Well, what these Boston researchers discovered, it's not that the dogs are moral, is that the dogs are very strongly bonded to their human owners, and they're basically motivated to do whatever will please you,
well,
the owner.
I've got that right, because Brinson will do anything to please this man.
Right.
He taught him as a little doggy not to bark, and he's never barked since, I mean, he loves you, Bob.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that's the thing about dogs. They'll do virtually anything to please the owner.
It makes them so lovable, doesn't it?
And so what they showed is that the dogs are simply responding to the human rebuke.
Yes.
And therefore, if they've done the good thing and not the bad thing, but you give them the look as if they've done something bad, then they'll take on the look of, well, you know what? I better please my owner. I'm going to look like I'm repentant.
And we as humans have done the same thing.
Right. So anyway, that led to a lot more research on the dog behavior, and actually they went on to investigate what's called the mean dog syndrome.
That's worse than a bad dog.
Well, we talk about bad dogs and evil dogs, and so they're exploring, is it really true that dogs are like human beings, that they're good and bad? And what they discovered, once again, it's got nothing to do with morality on the part of the dog. It's got everything to do with pleasing the owner. And so, for example, if a dog is owned by someone who is mean and malicious, the dog will take on those characteristics to please its owner. And so
that's why my dog is so lovable and sweet and humble, because he's just like his owner.
Yes, okay.
Well, there's some truth in that. I mean, and so mean dogs are owned by mean people. Affectionate dogs are owned by people that are gentle and affectionate. And so it's simply the dog doing everything it can to please its owner. It's not that the dog is a sinner or is virtuous. And so it's making the point that we humans alone have this spiritual dimension where we know right from wrong, where we respond to morality, where we're aware that someone is watching us and judging us, that there's a higher being. And so researchers are now recognizing that we're the only species that engages in philosophy. We're the only species that's concerned what's going to happen to us after we die. The animals don't worry about it. We're the one creature that anticipates future pain. Animals don't. So, well, I mean, people often will anthropomorphize the suffering of animals, which explains why they kind of look at animals in human terms. But the truth is, they don't suffer like we suffer.
No.
It's because we have that anticipation that future suffering is coming.
Another thing I can think of that a dog or an animal, or any animal can't do is art, or enjoy any form of art. A dog doesn't, or an animal doesn't.
Well, it depends what you mean by art. I mean, I've seen some art done by animals. It looks a lot like art I see in modern art museums. or art that's produced by computers.
You got me on that one.
So there's art and art.
Yeah, there's art and then there's art.
So, but yeah, there is a big difference. And that, like one of the points is that we're the only species that wears jewelry. I mean, of course, now they got dogs that they dress up.
Of course. In California, where you're from, there's a lot of dogs with some bling on them.
What's the amazing thing about God's dogs? Sorry, I got to be careful. God gave them a DNA. God gave them a DNA so that they can be extremely flexible in the way we breed them. It's like, here's a designer pet.
Right.
We can take these dogs and basically put them into almost any shape we want.
It's true, we can.
I believe that's a gift from God. He knew that we would have that propensity as
Because
human
we wanted
beings.
a lab, but we didn't want him to shed, so we got a Labradoodle it's like a poodle lab.
And now they're actually breeding dogs that are clothing tolerant. Because people
Really?
are wanting to dress them up.
Okay.
So
well,
that's
there
a
you
new
go.
set of breeds of
I
dogs that are
had
coming
not heard
out.
about that yet.
So, but again, back to the point is that animals in the wild will not put jewelry on, but we put jewelry on. And the moment that human beings show up in the scene, jewelry is there right away.
Even in the tribal, you look at the old tribal.
Well, if you look at the most ancient remains of human society, we see jewelry. We see shells, for example, that have no purpose for food or tools.
But for beauty.
But for beauty, and they're for adorning the body.
Yeah.
In fact, the joke is when you do this kind of research, you discover that in every case, the jewelry is more numerous than the tools. So humans seem to have a greater appreciation of jewelry than they do even of tools that are necessity. That's the other thing.
Isn't that interesting?
We humans, other animals will use tools, but we humans can invent tools. We can actually take tools and make them better and continue to advance them. And when you look at Neanderthals used tools, but there was no advance in tool technology. And they never got beyond just taking a shaped stone. When humans show up on the scene, there are stones that are attached to wood with sinew that have multiple purposes, and the design sophistication. And we see music and art. When humans show up on the scene, immediately they're musical instruments.
Yes.
You don't see that with the other animals. So it's making the point, we humans are distinct from all of their life. There really are 3 tiers of life that God created. And we're the one species that has the capability of relating to God himself. But we're also a species that has responsibility before God. And so it kind of ties together this book with the previous book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. We humans are here to be tools in God's hand to eliminate evil and suffering once and for all. And so you look at the evil and suffering that Job was exposed to, that kind of underlines the message. That's why we're here. We're here to eliminate it, not only in this universe, but in the angelic realm as well.
Yes.
And so there will come a time when we'll enter the new creation where evil and suffering will never exist again.
Yes.
But right now, it serves a good purpose. It is preparing us for a much higher good.
Well,
Wow, profound.
Hugh, thank you so much. People, again, the book is entitled Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, How the Oldest Book of the Bible Answers Today's Scientific Questions. Chapter 7 is one of my most favorite in the book, Unique Attributes of Humans. And you might be sitting there thinking, it's so obvious. Of course. But yet you've never heard it this way, or described this way, or put in a language, or connected a couple sentences together to make a paragraph. This book has been just so very helpful for me, and I know that it'll be helpful for you.
Yeah.
We'll take a short break. We'll be back with Dr. Ross right after this.
Coming up next time on My New Day.
And I firmly believe that God created us human beings to be the primary means by which he would rid his entire creation of all evil and suffering. And as it tells us in the New Testament, that will be achieved as we who are followers of God take the good news of salvation through the creator of the universe, namely Jesus Christ, to all the people groups of the world.
As we close the program, you may be asking the question, how is this going to affect my life? How can I change who I am or be challenged in a way that my life will be different? So, Dr. Ross, how would you answer a question like that after knowing this information?
I love what Bob said just before the break. It's
Thank
obvious.
For you to say that, that makes me feel really good.
Well, I think it is obvious if we would simply pay attention to what God has inspired in the 66 books of the Bible. We really don't need these researchers at UCLA and UC San Diego to tell us that we're different from the animals, that there's a major difference. And we need to appreciate why we're different.
Yes.
It's amazing how God designed these animals to serve and please us.
Yes.
But we were designed to serve and please God. And need to appreciate that because we are so different, so much more valuable, we need to take very seriously His purpose for our life here on planet Earth.
When that becomes a reality for us, I'll treat you differently. You know what I mean? We'll treat each other differently.
You're right.
You know, because there's a deeper honor, you know, of one another, recognizing that, yes, you truly are created in the image and the likeness of God. Therefore, you have great value. And I think, you know, one of the greatest deceptions that a secular society would want to create is that everything is common, everything is, you know, equal, you know, that type of a thing. And it's like, no, you are an individual of great value and of great worth. And when we see that in each other, we'll prefer each other as more important than ourselves. We'll honor, we'll serve one another, we'll care for one another. We'll be able to heal society. So Dr. Ross, thank you so much. Again, please, I can't encourage you enough. Please get a copy of the book. Others by Dr. Ross. We need to go. We're going to be back again tomorrow.
Oh,
Another
tomorrow's going to
program.
be a good one. We're going to talk about answering the question, are we in the end times? Is this the end? We're going to ask those kind of questions to Dr. Ross.
Be with us tomorrow here on My New Day.
Bye-bye.